for other people to join us. And welcome to the latest Lunchtime Bites webinar from the ICBE Advanced Productivity SkillNet. Today, our speaker is Dr. Sarah Kieran of the Kemmy Business School in the University of Limerick on the emerging area of the digital transformation of customer service and the emergence of the CX professional. For those of you who were at the conference last year, you would have seen Sarah present on this topic, and she led new research that was recently published by the ICBE. This found that the role of the customer experience employees in Ireland is undergoing significant transformation because of advancements in new technology. The research identified how digital transformation has impacted the skill set required of CX employees of the future. Over the course of 20 minutes, Sarah will share how dexterity, critical thinking, continued innovation, diversity, and proactive bottom-up digital transformation are key to the successful development of the CX professional. The ground rules for today: Sarah will present for approximately 20 minutes, finishing up with a 5-minute Q&A. We invite questions, and if you could put them into the chat function, we will pull them up at the very end. Everybody is muted, but if you notice any background noise, if you just wouldn't mind checking your checking that you're muted at your end. And no further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Sarah. I'm just checking that everyone can see our screen. I might just put this into presentation mode first.
Great. Go back to the beginning. Yeah.
Now, can everybody see the screen? Okay, apologies about the interruption there, and now Dr. Sarah.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for taking the time to allow us to share this research with you. As Owen said, my name is Dr. Sarah Kieran. I'm from the Department of Work and Employment in the Kemmy Business School here in the University of Limerick. This research was funded by SkillNet Ireland through ICBE, the Irish Centre for Business Excellence's Advanced Productivity SkillNet. So we're very grateful to our organisational partners and funding partners for bringing this research to the fore. The research was essentially looking to explore the area of customer service work in Ireland. As it is evolving very much from the notion of the customer service type call centre through to the more advanced, digitally transformed customer experience workplace. Now, going into this research, we knew that the area of customer service work was changing, and we assumed quite strongly that there was a significant impact due to this transformation on the people who held these jobs. There are concerns from a national perspective around the employability of these people, how the skills might be impacted due to technological transformation, and whether these skills might be becoming obsolete, or whether there was an opportunity to upskill people in these roles. But we knew there was a challenge there, we knew there was an issue there, but we didn't really understand it, and we certainly couldn't articulate it. And above that, again, from a societal level and obviously an individual level, there were some concerning questions around, do these jobs still exist? Are they being transformed into obsolescence? Or are there opportunities to advance our global offering in this space? So that was the kind of the overarching context of the research. We were focusing specifically then on anyone we felt fell into the category of a customer service employee. And that was quite a loose, broad boundary to place on it at the outset. We weren't even sure if there was one single type of employee within this sector. We were trying to determine the answer to that question, but then also look specifically at the skills of these individuals. if we could manage to achieve that, our next step then was to try and determine loosely at this stage, but what is the impact of this changing skill set on HR practices around recruitment and selection, the development of these people, the labour market for these people, and the long-term employability of these people. So that very much sets the scene for the research. There was a team of 4 researchers from the University of Limerick, led by myself. My colleagues Lorraine Ryan, Juliette McMahon and Sarah McCurtain were also very involved. Thank you to the organisations who granted us access to their employees. It's always one of the 2 biggest challenges for research, are access to the people you need to talk to and funding to have the time to talk to them. And we would like to thank Northern Trust and Dell for giving us very significant access to their leaders and their customer service employees. The research was undertaken towards the end of 2018, beginning of 2019. We conducted 32 in-depth interviews with leaders in both organisations across 5 different sites and across 8 different business domains. So we looked at such business domains as logistics, as shared services in IT, in HR. We looked at more specific technical support type services, fund accounting, customer relationship management services. So we felt we had a very broad sample of both leaders and employees that all would fall into this broad category of customer service. As well as the in-depth interviews with the 32 leaders, we also conducted 11 in-depth focus groups with 58 customer service employees in the organisation. Finally, we brought the high-level findings to a round-table research review representing 8 other organisations in fields such as retail, banking, small business sector, manufacturing, etc., just to get a broader sense of how well the findings resonated across different forms and types of organisations. So moving on to the findings. The first question we had entering the research was, is there such a thing as a customer service employee? As we further identified them as the customer experience professional, the CX professional, our first critical finding was that yes, regardless of the industry sector or the business domain one is operating in within that sector, there was a very clear generic skill set and very clear generic role that was transferable across sectors and business domains. Looking at this particular role, we saw that the individual at the heart of this customer experience is firstly operating at a very broad level across multiple systems, multiple geolocations, multiple business domains, and managing multiple types and forms of global customers. So the role often is referred to as a swivel chair role. So if you can imagine you're office-based, you're probably working off a number of screens, you are engaging with customers across multiple systems, so online, on headsets, on email, etc., in virtual meeting type environments. You're using multiple systems and platforms, so you will have different IT systems you need to interrogate, you will have different databases you will have to access. Some of those will be site systems, and some of them may be supplier systems or broader global systems that you need to access. Both of the organisations we engaged with were multinationals, so that brings in this geolocation element. So not only are you looking at multiple different systems, you're also looking at multiple different sites where those systems or the customers are located. This was also reflected, interestingly, even in national organisations where you would assume, well, okay, we're talking about one site, we're talking about one sector, but even still, given how business operating models have changed so fundamentally in recent years, even with smaller or national organizations, this element of multiple systems and multiple geolocations is still quite prevalent. The notion of multiple domains, again, reflects the nature of business models today and how value chains have become so more widely dispersed. We are dealing with, for example, logistics in one site, we're dealing with finance in another, we're dealing with an IT in a third, our customer is in a fourth. So for the customer experience professional at the heart of this, again, I bring you back to that swivel chair analogy. Though we may not be physically swiveling, we're mentally swiveling on a repetitive basis throughout the day, accessing, collating, coordinating, aligning data from multiple systems, multiple locations, multiple domains in order to bring together and make sense of these data information, turn them into insights that we can then present either proactively to engage our customers or reactively in response to customer issues that have been raised to us. So having given you that kind of high level overview of what it's like to be a customer experience professional, we will move on now to look at the key findings of the report. And I highlight 6 specific findings. I'll go through them with you now in a high level, and we'll come back to some of them in a little bit more detail shortly. The first finding is very much the notion that while we were using this byline, the future of work, really the future of work is now. And I don't think that's a great surprise to any of us. In any of our work, we can already see the digital transformation. And there are many statistics already available to us globally that, 50% of people have seen their jobs quite fundamentally transformed in the last 5 years due to digital transformation. What was interesting in our study was that despite the level of digital transformation, so we're all seeing our roles being transformed. However, some of us have engaged more because of maybe the sector or the site or the business domain we're in. Some of us are more digitally transformed in our jobs than others. Despite the stage of digital transformation, the work is remaining the same. And that probably is because digital transformation is not a magic wand. It's not a smooth process. Anyone who's gone through a system upgrade will fully acknowledge that. Therefore, while digital transformation is improving processes, it very often disrupts processes as that improvement is ongoing. And because it's agile now, because it's not happening in a very linear staged manner, we're caught in this digital transformation storm. And as a result, whether we're fully digitalized or partially digitalized or just beginning that journey, the skills we need to deal with it are the same. We see digital transformation happening quite interestingly, both top down, so maybe a global business services or a system launch, but also bottom up, where in line with continuous improvement approaches, organizations, teams, even individuals are looking to standardize processes and digitalize them on a piecemeal basis, probably appreciating that at some point a global strategy is going to overlay that. However, the view is if we can engage with digitalization in any way, it builds up the skills we need to then contend with the global digitalization event that happens at some point. As I've said already at the top of the presentation, there is a very clear emergence of a customer experience professional that transcends sector, site, business domain, the skill set that they need and the nature of work that they engage in, be they dealing with internal global business services or external small to medium individual or global corporate customers. The job is pretty much the same. As a researcher, we found that quite interesting when we moved from Northern Trust Financial Services, finished there on a Friday, started in Dell ICT on a Monday, and really once we were in the focus group, it really didn't matter that we changed, had a significant shift in change of business sector. The conversation the issues, the challenges were exactly the same. And this is a really interesting finding, because what it means that the skills are transferable, and that is a significant finding for this type of emerging profession now. Similar, maybe we could hark back to the concept of the project manager emerging as a profession, and the view that regardless of the sector, if you were a project manager, you could manage a project in multiple environments. I think this is happening now with the customer experience professional. It's a profession and it is transferable. Moving on then to the skills. If we go back again a number of years and we talk about the kinds of skills we need in this space, the labels remain the same. So we talk about the need to collaborate, influence, negotiate, be organized, think critically, think creatively, innovate, problem solve. These skill labels or competency labels have been around for many, many years. And when we started the conversation with organizations at a leader level, we were hearing the same labels. What we found significantly among not all, but many leaders was that there was a difficulty in then articulating what does collaboration mean. Okay, we know these employees need to collaborate to solve customer problems, but what does that look like? What are the tasks involved? How does it happen? Leaders struggle to articulate that, and that's reflected in academic literature as well, that there's a lack of rich descriptions around some of these skills in particular sectors. So that was very much the focus of this study. And while we found that many of the skills remain the same, the critical finding was around this concept of skilled dexterity. So we still need to apply these skills. However, the level to which we need to apply them, the pace at which we need to apply them, and when and how we apply them has changed fundamentally. It's not a case now of we collaborate in this meeting and we innovate on that call and then we need to think critically about this problem. It's that with every customer issue, we need to collaborate, think critically, negotiate, etc. So it is this sense of the level and pace of application of the skill that has changed and changed fundamentally. Why? Key finding 4, we have a phrase stolen from Northern Trust, gone through an 80-20 flip. And this would be common to us even as consumers. If we take banking online as a typical example, we used to go into our branch, those of us who can still remember our bank books, used to go into our branch to deal with our problems. Now we self-serve 80% of the time online. Therefore, when we present ourselves in our branch, that 20% is a significant problem. And that has flipped in that we are self-serving ourselves 80% of the time. So the person on the receiving end of that, where they were dealing with 20% of problems, now they're dealing with 80% of problems online. So while technology has in some ways pushed the customer into the self-service space, be they internal or external, when they do present to us, 80% of the time, they are presenting with very critical issues that they could not solve for themselves. So for me as an employee, I could spend 80% of my time dealing with routine standard queries and 20% of my time intense problem solving. That has now flipped. 20% of my time is routine standard issues and 80% is intense problem solving. So to summarize those key findings, we are all engaged in digital transformation, top-down and bottom-up, and both are important. There is a very clear customer experience professional with a very distinct skill set. Though the labels may seem familiar, the depth at which they need to be applied, the pace to which they need to be applied, and the speed and dexterity is very significantly new for us. The skills that we have identified through, what's really important to appreciate about these skills is we didn't meet with these employees and ask them, what skills do you think you need? We asked them to describe in great detail some critical incidents they had experienced at work. And then we as researchers applied the skills to the tasks and the issues that they had dealt with. And a nice simple model to understand skills is the things we do, how we relate with other people, and how we think. What we found within those skills is that in terms of what we do, data dexterity is absolutely fundamental to these roles. And again, we've been talking about data literacy for some time now. This is not, I'm data literate, and I'm not talking about data literacy. I'm talking about the concept of data dexterity, where one can interrogate systems, interpret data to the point of being able to identify anomalies in the data. And while technology is making that interpretation easier, is doing a lot of that collating for us, and is even red flagging anomalies to us, the ability then to know what to do with that anomaly is where the dexterity comes in, and the ability then to tell that story to the customer, to visualize back to the customer. That's not data literacy. It's something much, much bigger and deeper than that. Similarly, we talk about interdisciplinary dexterity, the need to cross different business domains. We're not talking about having a simple working knowledge of sales, IT, finance. We're talking about having very in-depth business acumen, not deep dive those domains, but how those domains fit together to resolve a customer problem. Customer centricity is fairly self-explanatory. That's always been there, and we know it's more and more at the heart of the business. Again, I would look to skills like intercultural dexterity. We talk about cultural awareness. We need to know the basics of how different cultures like to work together. However, I'm not talking about how people like to greet and meet. I'm talking about how people do business and the various protocols and different forms of business acumen that are culturally rooted. We don't seem to be doing a lot of training on that within organizations. Similarly, we need to influence, we need to network, we need to negotiate. There is a fallacy, I think, in business today that because we're all under the one brand, we're certainly not under the one roof anymore, but because we're all under one brand, that we are able to go out and leverage that brand to get team spirit, to get people connected. I think organizations today are more like open markets. When you go out to the coder in India, when you go out to the logistics expert in Ireland, when you go to the distributor in Poland, you may as well be on an open market. So getting that team to pull together with different targets, different reporting lines, requires a very significant level of negotiation that I think we sometimes don't appreciate. Moving on then now to the cognitive skills, again, in how we think. We're looking at the notion of sense making. Given the level of digital transformation and the level of dexterity needed and the pace of work in these jobs, where are we finding time to make sense of this? And this was something that was seen as kind of critical to bringing all of this agile work together, but that is probably not a space for time and thinking that is not as well created in organizations as it possibly should be. Critical thinking is relatively self-explanatory. Again, borrowing the notion of agile, how we are now learning and how we are now working, I think is encapsulated in that word dexterity, whereby how we engage with the workplace, be it through real-time learning online, in between different jobs at our desk, face-to-face coaching on the floor of the office, as well as modular classroom-based training. How we're learning is very significantly different. To tie up that whole notion of the swivel chair employee and the concept of agile working. As a result, the more linear development pathways of the past are being seriously compromised and challenged by this digital transformation. Because we always had this 80% routine, transactional, be it safe space, we could bring in graduates or new entrants to the organization and allow them learn the tools of their trade in a very modular, linear fashion, developing up typically to about a 5 to 8 year time where they are fully formed customer experience professionals. And traditionally that was within the one organization. Today, we are seeing that this space, safe space, has been eroded, that when people come into these roles, the level of performance they need in terms of skill dexterity is much higher. Now, what does that mean? It means, firstly, we need to create safe spaces for training purposes and development purposes. Secondly, it means that we can no longer rely on this graduate pipeline where they have a number of years in this safe space before they become customer experience professionals, because the agile learning environment is going to be more on the job, modular, real-time, online learning experiences. But from a labour market perspective, because the jobs are now generic, because these skills are transferable, we need to be considering broadening our pipeline, broadening our labour market, and viewing that we can bring in customer experience from professionals from very radically different sectors and forms of organisations and bring them into that 80% space. I think leaders need to be challenged on that concept, because many leaders, we found, are still very much of the view that there is a very set pipeline that people learn within the organisation, and that these jobs are not necessarily fully recognised as advanced professional roles that are not just transferable within the organisation, but transferable within the open labour market. And that does require significant rethinking from a HR practice system in terms of how we identify them, recruit them, select them, develop them, and sustain them then within the organisation. I think that the closing question is, now that we know we have these customer experience professionals, now that we know we have a better understanding of their skills and their environment, can they thrive within our organisation? This has been a very much a whistle-stop tour of a much more detailed report, which is available on the Irish Centre of Business Excellence homepage. And if you're interested in it, I would encourage you to read the report. All good research, they say, leaves you with more questions than answers. We certainly have a keen interest in developing this research. So if there are organisations where this really resonates and they feel they have more questions, apart from just answering them in the next 10 minutes, we'd be very interested in talking to you further about progressing this research with you. So thank you again for joining today. Thank you to Dell and Northern Trust for allowing us to engage with them on the journey. And thank you to SkillNet and the ICBE for funding the project. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to pop them up. You're all still muted. I think, is that going to remain?
Yeah, no, we keep everybody muted. If you put your questions into chat, and maybe just to kick things off, Sarah, I believe you've been talking to quite a few organisations since the report was published, and I'm just curious to hear what you're hearing back from organisations. Do they feel they're ready for it, or where are they on the journey? And secondly, is there a natural starting point for organisations looking at this?
Yeah, I would always say the natural starting point is to share this research within the organisation yourselves. And as I said, we can make this presentation available, and the report is on the ICBE website, and initially see, does it resonate with people in the organisation? I think the starting point, I believe, for everything in organisations sits at the leadership table. So I think sharing this at the leadership table and conversing around how people respond to this research would always be a starting point. I think that things need to begin at the leadership table, and how people fundamentally view these jobs. One of the fallacies, I think, of digital transformation is that technology makes service employees' lives easier and more interesting. And I think we need to challenge that significantly. Digitalization of work may remove the routine and the standard, but that does not equal easier and more interesting. It very often means, with this 80-20 flip, more complex, more challenging, and having to apply higher level of complex skills at a more frequent pace. So I think that needs to be challenged. I think other perceptions, not just among leaders, but among employees themselves, such as, I am a fund accountant, I am a logistics expert, and I will remain so. That needs to be challenged among employees and leaders as well. The notion that as a customer experience professional, your skill set is strong and it is transferable. So the HR practices around recruitment and selection, and the employees themselves viewing their skill set needs to be considered. And there is a huge agenda there with regard to recruitment, selection and development. Huge agenda there.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine the change management and the wide impact that all this has.
Yeah.
If there's no more questions, I'd just like to thank Sarah for, this is normally a 50-minute presentation that you've managed to distill then into 25 minutes, which is really impressive. Thank you very much for all that expertise.
Thank you.
As Sarah mentioned, the presentation or the report is available on the website, and we hope to have a recording of this presentation that we'll be uploading later on. And thank you very much, Sarah. And to everyone who attended today, thank you very much as well. And if you have any comments on further areas you'd like to explore, please get in touch with Kate in ICBE, or Sarah has given her email address there also. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for joining today.